Hello everyone, welcome to this GMF on Turkey conversation. My name is Kadri Taştan. I'm TOBB Senior Fellow with the German Marshall Fund here in Brussels. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is actually the fifth session of the GMF Turkey conversation since the outbreak of the COVID-19. And even if under this pandemic, it's difficult to get attention to almost anything but this crisis, we are trying to come together virtually to discuss some of the most important issues concerning Turkey and other issues. Today's focus will be on Turkey-Russia relations. So for almost 10 years, if we put aside a crisis period of 8 or 9 months, when the Russian aircraft was shut down by Turkey, Ankara and Moscow have chosen to compartmentalize their dialogue, minimizing conflicting files and ostensibly displaying their agreement. This relation have developed in recent years, especially since the attempted coup d'etat, the deterioration of Turkish relations with the West, and the direct engagement of Russia in Syrian conflict. But the recent tension between Ankara and Moscow in Idlib in Syria has revived doubt about the political relation between Turkey and Russia. So obviously here there are a lot to discuss, and for this we have an excellent panel today. Let me first introduce them. Our first speaker is General Ben Hodges. He's a former commanding general of US Army in Europe, and he's currently Pershing Chair at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Thank you, General, for joining. And our second speaker is Professor Mustafa Aydın. He's a professor of international relations at the Kadir University. Thank you, Professor Aydın, for joining. And our third speaker is my colleague, Alina Inayeh. She's the director of Black Sea Trust for Regional Cooperation at GMF Bucharest. Thank you, Alina, for joining. First of all, as moderator, I will ask some questions to our speakers and have some conversation with them. And then we will we'll open up, of course, to all of you. Just to say that this is on the record, and if you would like to put a question, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom window, and we will keep track your question, and we will get as many of you as we can. Please, when you are asking also your question, just specify to whom you are asking your question. With this, I would like to start our first round to maybe focus a bit on the historical aspect of this relation. And Professor Aydın, I would like to start with you here. We know that the Turkey-Russia relation have a long history. Can you provide us a briefly historical perspective of this relation and its main characteristic in 2-3 minutes, please? Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kadri. It's nice to be here and nice to see friendly faces. Yes, it's a long history, and it's both the Turks and the Russians have long memories, and they have not forgotten what has happened in history. When you look at the history, a couple of phrases come to the mind. You know, geopolitical competition, historical hostility, territorial contraction, existential threats, and etc. So these are kind of catchphrases that comes to my mind, at least, when I look and read the Turkish-Russian history. At least since the 17th century, that was relationship was defined in terms of Russian attempt to move towards West and South, and Ottoman attempt to block Russia on both accounts. And especially after when we came to the 18th century, the struggle was about mostly Balkans and the Straits, who was going to control the Straits. And of course, the Black Sea was part of the competition even before that. However, you know, from the Ottoman-Turkish perspective, the relations with Russians were always related to warfare, conflict, and also territorial losses. That kind of a long memory was passed on to the Turkish state. Nevertheless, in the 20th century, we have seen a couple of periods where the two states collaborated with each other. And I'll come back to that. But the defining characteristic of the 20th century was, of course, especially after the Second World War, was Turkey's defensive position against its northern global nuclear neighbor, which it felt almost constantly, it felt under threat. That was the same threat that pushed Turkey at the end of the Second World War towards joining the Western alliance system, and it kept it there. And actually, of course, from the Western perspective, especially from the US perspective, the value of Turkey was its role in the containment policy of Soviet Union throughout the 20th century. At the end of the Second World War, when Soviet Union felt that it needed to ask joint control of the Straits, that was the defining moment of the relationship in the 20th century. But as I said, and I'll finish with this, there were a couple of periods where Turkey and Russia collaborated. And in both periods, the defining characteristic is that both states had difficult relationship with the West. Of course, Soviet Union always had difficult relations throughout the 20th century with the West, but in the moments when Turkey had problems, it always tried to use Russia or Soviet Union at the time as a counterbalance to the West. So one example was in 1920s and 1930s, where both countries were feeling vulnerable from the Western attacks or Western pressure, and they cooperated with each other. And the second period is mid-1960s to mid-1970s, during which Turkey had a problematic relationship with the West, with the United States in general, and looked for Soviet Union for military and economic aid, mostly economic aid. And as a result, we have seen that Turkey was the biggest development aid receiver from the Soviet Union during the Cold War, apart from the Eastern Bloc countries. So we have seen ups and downs, but the defining characteristics are two. One, competition and wariness against the Soviet Union. And the second is moments of cooperation when Turkey felt vulnerable vis-a-vis West. So let me stop here.
Thank you, Professor Aydın. Thank you for this. General Hodges, if you let me, I would like to continue with you. Let's stay in this historical aspect of relation. What was Turkey's role in NATO vis-a-vis the Soviet Union during the Cold War? How satisfactorily did Turkey play this role? Over to you.
Thanks, Kadri. And for sure, I echo what Professor Aydın has said. Of course, Turkey's role inside the alliance, which it has performed extremely well for almost 7 decades, was a critical part of containment of the Black Sea Fleet, specifically because of Turkish sovereignty over the Straits, as part of a series, if you will. The Straits and then the Aegean Islands and then the island of Crete are all part of NATO's efforts to contain Soviet aggression. And Turkey did this extremely well, played its part extremely well. It also, of course, was home for thousands of American soldiers and airmen in several bases throughout Turkey. And of course, Turkey has provided a headquarters in Izmir for NATO since 1952, since Turkey joined the alliance, longer than any other headquarters in all of NATO, except for the headquarters in Naples. So it's been a long time reliable ally, and not to mention the fact that Turkish armed forces have always been very effective and capable, and Turkish officers have filled so many positions in alliance headquarters. Even Minister Akar served, when he was an officer, served in NATO headquarters. So that's the quality that we've come to expect of Turkish officers serving in headquarters. The original framework of the relationship, of course, was based on containment. What I would call, in fact, what my friend Oscar came up with this, this is Turkey USA or Turkey NATO 1.0. Military focus, Turkey at the bottom right-hand corner of most NATO maps, along with the Black Sea, and the boundary between U.S. European Command and U.S. Central Command also being the boundary between Turkey and Syria, which has had some unintended negative consequences, causing Turkey's role to be not appreciated, if you will, vis-a-vis the Central Command area, because you have two different headquarters on that boundary. And so for sure, it's time to reinvent this framework, a Turkey-USA 2.0, where Turkey and the Black Sea are in the middle of the map, not on the bottom right-hand corner of the map.
Thank you, General Hodges. Inayeh, Alina, looking from a historical perspective, what is Russia's regional perspective? How do they try to achieve this?
Throughout the history, Russia has seen this region as its own sphere of influence, a region which should stay in its own sphere of influence, and has seen the Black Sea as a Russian lake. We do have a saying across the region that, you know, Black Sea is a Russian lake. And they have been trying to achieve this again throughout the history, but especially so in the 20th century and now in the 21st century through two things, two directions. First of all, projecting power in the region, and second, exerting influence in the region. In the 20th century, after the Second War, projecting power was about projecting the military might of Russia without entering into direct conflicts or open conflicts, but just projecting the strength of the military army and of its military arsenal. Exerting influence was very much done through spreading the communist ideology throughout the region, through the propaganda machine of the Russian Communist Party. This has changed in the 21st century. This has changed with 2008 and especially in 2014, when Russia has started open direct conflicts in the region, starting with Georgia and then continuing with Crimea. Russia doesn't only project power. Russia is amassing a military arsenal in Crimea and throughout the region. And Russia, as I said, engages in direct conflicts, in open conflicts. It continues to succeed actually, to exert influence throughout the region, both through its propaganda and its disinformation machine.
If I may, if you want, try stay in the historical perspective, because in the second round we come to the really today, and I want to go step by step if you like.
Okay, so then let me end at the 20th century, before everything started to look the way it looks now, and just to say that Russia has only seen not the region, not the land, not the countries in the region, but also the Black Sea, as I said, as its internal lake, as its direct lake. Hence, the placing of the Black Sea fleet in one of its most important fleets in this sea. And I do want to talk a little bit about the propaganda machine, which did function very, very well throughout the 20th century, and which did keep all of the countries around in the region, with the exception of Turkey, in the ideological communist sphere.
Thank you, Alina. Sorry to interrupt you, but I will. Okay. Now we are going to the second round. I wanted to really go to today and coming to today and to see a bit the current relations. Professor Aydın, I would like to continue with you here. How would you define the Turkey-Russia relationship today? What are the drivers of Turkish-Russian rapprochement? And do you think Turkey and Russia are strategically compatible? You should unmute, Professor.
Okay, sorry. Well, rapprochement, of course, started in late 1990s, early 2000s. When you look at it, the first input was, I would say, the lessening of geopolitical competition over Eurasia, which defined the relationship in 1990s. You know, when Soviet Union collapsed, Turkey enthusiastically joined the fray to create an influence relationship, influence area in Eurasia, especially in the Caucasus and Central Asia. And also Turkish instigated movement of Black Sea economic cooperation, and also increased Turkish naval presence in the Black Sea, allowed Turkey to play this competition. And that was mostly in 1990s, and during this period, of course, Turkey was supported by the United States in this endeavor. And part of this competition, actually large part of this competition, was about the energy security and who is going to host the pipelines from the Caspian region. But at the end of the 1990s, we have seen that two countries, both Russia and Turkey, have realized their ambition of having a pipeline from the region. Baku-Novorossisk pipeline, Tengiz-Novorossisk pipeline in the Russian case, and Baku-Tiflis-Ceyhan pipeline in the Turkish case, lessened this competition, or the reason for this competition. Then came a period of problematic or triangle. United States started to appear in the region after 9/11 events, more increasingly. And this, of course, sidelined in a way. It was not maybe the intention, but this is unintentional consequences. It sidelined Turkey in the Caucasus and Central Asia. And Russia became locked in a competition with the United States over this region. This, of course, also kind of declined the intensity of competition between Turkey and Russia. And also it's increased, from the Turkish perspective, of an understanding that whether Turkey is happy to have non-Black Sea countries in the region. That's how it was formulated. And Turkey came to a conclusion that cooperating with Russia in the Caucasus and the Black Sea might be more beneficial for Turkish interests than competition with Russia. And then, of course, it started from that kind of a premises. The economic relationship started to grow, and that was the real bedrock of the rapprochement. And as a result, when we come in 2010s, the trade between two countries reached over $30 billion. The construction business reached about $65–70 million completed construction by 2017. Tourism is like 4.5 million Russians every year coming to Turkey, and investment in both countries, Turkish investment in Russia is about 10 billion, and comparable amount is invested in Turkey by Russia. So this is a very strong incentive for the leaders, political leaders, to invest their capital. But apart from that, we have an energy cooperation. Even before that, we had energy competition between Russia and Turkey. Turkey started to buying Russian natural gas in 1987, before the end of the Cold War. And now, when we come today, we have 3 pipelines operating under the Black Sea, directly linking 2 countries. And of course, added to this is now the Russian investment in Turkey to build Akkuyu nuclear power plant. So this is also a very strong incentive for the continuation of the rapprochement, at least. And finally is, I think, what really tipped the point after 2010 onwards was, and still is, the Syrian case. The changing perception of Turkey regarding the United States position in the Middle East, and also increasing distancing of Turkey from the West in general. This was, of course, not only the United States, but it was coupled, the timing also coupled with Turkey's kind of estrangement with the European Union as well. The relationship has been put on hold since 2005, and that kind of created a background. And when the United States become involved in Syria, especially with the Kurds, that triggered Turkey's age-old historical fear of dismemberment. And then Russia became a kind of an ally for Turkey to balance the United States in the region. And I think this is a kind of a picture at the moment. Whether they are compatible geopolitically, it's an interesting question. I believe personally that they are, even though they are cooperating and their cooperation have increased, I still do believe that they are in a competition geopolitically, because the region, the geography forces two countries to have this competition, because they are also very ambitious countries. Both Turkey and Russia in this neighborhood are very ambitious, even though now Turkey is struggling with several different problems and have to kind of scale back some of its ambitions. It doesn't mean that we have forgotten, or Turkey have forgotten all those ambitions. And recent examples in extension of the Mediterranean theater into Libya, for example. So when you look at different geographies that two countries come face to face, there is always competition, even in the Syrian theater. Even if when we are cooperating very closely in Syrian theater, when you watch the Syrian theater, there is a kind of a game of chess playing. You know, one country moves one chess piece to one side and the other responds. So there is always this, what I would call competitive cooperation or cooperative competition.
Thank you for this, Professor Aydın. General Hodges, I would like to continue with you here in this session. Can you evaluate the Turkish-Russian rapprochement from a transatlantic perspective? What does this mean for NATO and Turkey's position within NATO?
So I don't know if I would characterize it as rapprochement, as it's more of a continuation of an uneasy relationship between two large, important, powerful Black Sea neighbors. And frankly, to me, it seems completely normal that Turkey would look for ways to do business with Russia. They have to live across the Black Sea from Russia, so this is normal. And the fact that Turkey gets energy, for example, to me, this is normal. The tourism, the construction, all of these things seem like normal. Norway, on the other side of NATO, of course, has maintained for decades since it joined NATO, has had to cooperate with its Russian neighbor, just like everybody else does. And even when I was still in the Army and we would do exercises in Poland, the fuel that we were using for our vehicles was fuel that had been imported from Russia into Poland. So just because Turkey is an important part of NATO doesn't mean that I would expect Turkey not to have different types of a normal relationship with Russia. The problem is Russia's behavior, particularly in Syria. They have, and I think very deliberately, weaponized refugees. Russian support for the Assad regime has sent more than 3 million refugees into Turkey. And Turkey has had to carry this burden almost alone for several years now. President Putin could stop this immediately by putting the appropriate pressure on the Assad regime, but of course they have no interest in doing that. So I don't know how Turkey and Russia could be considered in some sort of rapprochement. And then of course, dozens of Turkish soldiers killed by a Russian airstrike in Syria, while the S-400 sits in boxes back in Turkey. So this is a very problematic relationship. What does this mean for Turkey's position in NATO? Look, the alliance is so much better with Turkey than without Turkey. Despite the challenges, despite the friction, Turkey sits in such an important place. It provides such important capabilities to the alliance. We are better having Turkey in the alliance. The problem is that we don't have a strategy. We, the West, we NATO, we, the United States, don't have a strategy for the Black Sea region. If you look at a map with the Black Sea in the middle, instead of down on the corner, and you look out the outer ring, it becomes immediately apparent how important Turkey is for the containment of Iran, for the deterrence of Russia, to help provide stability in the Balkan region. This is the important strategic role that Turkey can play. We just have to come up with a strategy. Now, if not for NATO, I would imagine that Turkey and Greece would have been in 2 or 3 different conflicts now, other than Cyprus. So the alliance is important for Turkey, and Turkey has to want to be an important part of this as well. The S-400 deal, this is a symptom of Turkey not having confidence in the West, as well as domestic concerns about security of the of the president. It has nothing to do with a budding romance between Turkey and Russia.
Thank you, General Hodges. Alina, you can of course follow up with your analysis in the first session, but here I have another question for you too. How do the regional countries see the Turkey-Russia rapprochement? How do they adjust?
I wouldn't characterize it as a rapprochement either. It's an on and off relation. And I think that countries in the region, as everybody else, have understood that it's an on and off transactional relation, as it should be, and as the countries themselves have with other actors. There are three stages of this relation and of Turkey's involvement in the region, because this is an important part of the conversation, which the countries in the region have witnessed, and they've had different feelings towards this. First of all, before 1990, everything was clear. The world order was much clearer than it is today, and the roles in the region, around the region, were very clear as well. After 1990, Turkey has become very interested in the Black Sea region, very active in the Black Sea region. BISEC has been, set up and placed in Istanbul, and for about 20 years, until 2008, Turkey has played a very active role in the region with initiatives, with ideas, with regional initiatives and ideas, I want to say. Everything, of course, changed in 2008 with the NATO summit in Bucharest, after which Russia decided to change its role in the region and to become aggressive, militarily aggressive. And then 2 years later, Turkey has started withdrawing from the region because withdrawing its attention from the region because its attention moved southwards, towards Middle East, towards Syria, towards the conflicts there and its southern border. So the countries in the region have witnessed the on and off relation, as I said, after 2008, after Russia became aggressive, initially with very much concern, thinking that when Russia and Turkey had a good relation, when they were close with each other, when they seemed to cooperate, that this is going to mean into even more aggression in the region, into an even more aggressive Russia in the region, new hot conflicts, new territories to be annexed, and so on and so forth. But as I said, it was very soon understood that it's a transactional relationship, it's on and off. It doesn't lead to Russia being more aggressive in the region. And now what I witnessed, my analysis is that countries in the region are much less focused on the relation between Turkey and Russia, and Turkey, as I said, has become a minor player in the region. It has maintained its role in NATO when it comes to the Black Sea region, but otherwise politically it has very much withdrawn. And countries in the region have started looking more at NATO, at the EU, and at the US as important players in the region, rather than worrying, being concerned, and being consumed with a Russia-Turkey relation.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you for this. Well, before going to the third round or to more military issues, I would like to just remind to our audience that if you would like to ask a question, there is a Q&A function at the bottom of Zoom window. Please put it there, and please specify also to whom you are asking your question. In this session round, I would like to start with you, General Hodges. Russia occupies part of Ukraine and Georgia and is militarily active in Syria and Libya, and is increasingly active in the Eastern Mediterranean. And Turkey is in the middle of all this. How does Russia put Turkey in the middle of its military strategy?
Well, Professor Aydın could describe the historical aspect of this much better than me, but of course, when Catherine the Great seized Crimea at the end of the 18th century, it was done to alleviate one of Russia's traditional strategic vulnerabilities, and that's the lack of access, warm water access to the oceans of the world. And so that's why Catherine seized Crimea then. And it's why, of course, President Putin re-seized it and illegally annexed Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula, here just a few years ago. The Black Sea is the launching pad for Russia, for everything it does in the Middle East, in the Eastern Mediterranean, and in North Africa, Libya specifically. The ships, everything that's used in Syria, for example, weapons, troops, equipment, it all comes out of the Black Sea. It's the launching pad. I had a conversation one time with a senior intelligence official from Romania who was describing the Black Sea and what it means to Russia. He said, think of the Black Sea as a balcony for the Kremlin, from which it looks out over the Caucasus, the Middle East, the Balkans, and beyond. And of course, Turkey sits in the way. It's right in the middle of this view and this Syrian Express that people in the region refer to it, that all the ships coming from Russia into Syria has to pass through the Turkish Straits. So therefore, Russia has always sought to try and control at least the Straits, if not Turkey itself. Now, that's also why Turkey needs allies, and that's why the allies need Turkey, because of this competition. And Alina, of course, was correct to say that so many people refer to the Black Sea as a Russian lake. I think that's the aspiration, but it's not the fact yet. The United States Navy and other allies still, within the constraints of Montreux Convention, still operate in the Black Sea. And as I was reminded by a very good Turkish admiral one time, when I was talking about the need for full-time NATO presence in the Black Sea, he said, General, we have full-time NATO presence 365 days of the year. It's the Turkish Navy. So it was an important reminder to me. Now, Turkey is the de facto leader of NATO, or the executive agent in the Black Sea region for NATO. They've always wanted that. And so, unfortunately, Turkey has tended to push back on NATO initiatives to increase headquarters there, to increase capability there. I would like to see Turkey be more active in the Black Sea region and more welcoming of a greater NATO presence there as well, but also to compete in the information space. Turkey should be the first to say any ship that goes into a Crimean port is poison and should not be allowed in the port of any NATO country coming directly from Crimea, in support of Ukraine, where the president of Ukraine had said all the ports are closed of Crimea. And so for anybody to allow ships to come from a port, from Sevastopol, for example, or any other Crimean port, to come into their port, de facto acknowledges Russian sovereignty over the Crimean Peninsula. Turkey, I think, should be a country to help lead the charge on pushing back on this. Same thing, they should challenge Russia's claims, illegal claims, to an economic exclusion zone, exclusive economic zone, and territorial waters around the Crimean Peninsula that are illegal and invalid because of the illegal annexation. Turkey could be very helpful here.
Thank you, General Hodges. Alina, linked to the same, actually, to continue to the same topic here, my question for you will be, well, through the its illegal annexation of Crimea, investment in the Black Sea Fleet, and A2AD capability it has deployed, as you have already mentioned, Russia has become the dominant naval power in Black Sea. Do you think, are there ways to reverse this without violating the Montreux Treaty?
First of all, I do need to say something about Russian naval power. Russia is not only a naval power in the Black Sea. Russia is also a military power. There is very, very strong, very much Russian arsenal amassed in Crimea, which is not naval. It's not ships. It's land. It's landmines and everything else. So we have to take this into consideration as well. We cannot just ignore everything that Russia has put there in Crimea. And then we haven't talked about it, and maybe it will come up. I hope it will come up throughout the questions. Russia is using a lot of other means other than military to dominate the region and to dominate the Black Sea region. As I said, it's the propaganda, it's the disinformation, it's all of the disruptions that Russia is mastering from Kremlin. I will not talk about it, but I do hope that there are going to be questions about it. It's very important. It's an important part what Russia is doing, because it's about perception. And I think General Hodges was somehow hinting at it, saying that, of course, Black Sea is not a Russian lake, but there are some countries in the region, or there are some governments in the region, rather, I would say, which perceive Black Sea as a Russian lake. So it's about perception as well. It's not only about reality. And Russia knows how to play it. Coming back to your question, though, which is naval, it's very naval. Well, there are a few ways around it. Some of them are ideal. They won't happen. Some of them are more practical. But first, I think we need to keep in mind that there is a strong NATO presence in the Black Sea. There are military exercises which are being held in the Black Sea, NATO military exercises, joint exercises which are being held in the Black Sea. So NATO is doing its best to project its naval power in the Black Sea. What else could be done, and how could the Montreux Convention be bypassed? Because I don't think it will ever be changed. First of all, NATO and the US could help partner countries strengthen their own fleet, could help NATO member countries, NATO partner countries, to increase and to strengthen their own fleet. This way, the permanent naval presence in NATO presence in the Black Sea would increase even more. Of course, ideally, with Georgia and Ukraine becoming NATO members, this would be an even stronger naval presence in the region. Another way around the Montreux Convention, but that would place an even higher role, or even would give an even more power to Turkey, is the newly projected Istanbul Channel. That would be a way around the Montreux Convention, but I'm not sure this is a path that NATO would be very willing to choose as increasing its naval presence in the region.
Thank you, Alina. Professor Aydın, I would like to continue with you here. In the recent battle in Idlib, Turkey suffered considerable losses thanks to Russian support to the Syrian regime, and Turkey, it was reported, inflicted heavy losses on the Syrian regime, destroying lots of Russian-made equipment in the process. So can Turkey and Russia really move beyond this? Could you please unmute? Thanks.
Let me just say a few words about the Black Sea also, because
yeah, sure.
Dear to me, Black Sea is here. General Hodges actually indicated very rightly that there is this a connection between Black Sea and the Russian presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. Without the Crimea and the bases there, the Russian Black Sea fleet would not have been able to support logistically what it has been doing in Syria. So on my mind, at least, this whole theater of operation from Black Sea to the Levant is just one theater of operation. So we have to look at it all together. And this is something I think is missing in Turkish foreign policy making and Turkish security analysis. Up until Crimea, 2012, just before the Crimea actually, Turkey was the biggest naval force in the Black Sea. But after taking over Crimea and also getting about 70% of what was left of former Soviet Black Sea fleet on Ukraine, and then investing on it, Russian Black Sea fleet now became the biggest naval force in the Black Sea. And as Alina already indicated, they supported that force with land-based missiles and created a very strong A2AD zone in the Black Sea. And linked this zone with another A2AD zone on the northeast of Turkey on the Armenian border. There are Russian missiles and exactly the same zone. And also they have been able to create the same zone in Syria where around Tartus and their other zones that they control. So now they are able to control this no-go zone in a sense in three sides of Turkey. And this is for the first time in history that Turkey is surrounded in a sense by the Russian presence. It's on the north, it's on the northeast, and it's on the south. And that has never happened before. And I think, personally, I believe that Turkish decision-making process has not really go through the strategic implications of this three-sided presence. So Idlib, obviously the two countries has, in a sense, moved beyond Idlib, and they signed a latest agreement. But this has become a kind of very familiar behavior in Syria, and especially in Idlib. From my perspective, I understand that Idlib is eventually going to be part of the area controlled by the Syrian regime. But this is not going to be in a one-step move. It is like a salami move. They build up their forces, they move, Turkey opposed, there is some clashes, then there is an agreement, we give up a territory. Then we have 3-4 months of peace, then the next attempt start. So Idlib is not going to be totally stabilized, that's obvious. But also Idlib is not an existential threat either for Turkey or for Russia. So it's a tactical area for both countries. It's not strategic for both countries. For Turkey, the zone just beyond the Turkish border on the north was a strategic area because it linked to the Kurdish desires and etc. Idlib is not such a zone. So it's not a strategic, it's not an existential threat either for Turkey or Russia. So they can always, in a sense, move beyond their competition there, and which they have so far able to do. The real problems, of course, from the Turkish perspective, is that Turkey still needs Russia in Syrian theater vis-a-vis east of Euphrates. The cooperation there is quite important to balance out other actors. Also, Turkey-controlled zone in the northern Syria, where the potential is that if Idlib is settled, then the next question might be the Turkish-controlled zone or Syrian National Army-controlled zone. And finally, of course, the future of endgame and the future of Syria, where Turkey needs Russia to play with. So for Turkey, Russia is more important, I think, than Idlib. And they try to, and the decision makers in Turkey, understanding this, are trying very hard to ignore, within quotation marks, what Russia is really doing. When there is a downing of Turkish, when there is a bombing of Turkish troops, most of the indications show that this is either Russian or by Russian allowed to do it, but the Turkish government chooses to ignore that and blames the Syria and tries to give the message to Russia over Syrian forces. So I think both countries do understand the balance, and so far the value of them to each other is more important than totally breaking up the relationship. So they have moved beyond the Idlib, but they couldn't, I think, forget Idlib. It will come back in more or less 5 months from now.
Thank you, Professor Aydın. Before opening up for the questions, I am sure there will be a question about the S-400 issue. So could you explain why did Turkey buy S-400 system from Russia? And why did Turkey delay the activation, which was supposed to take place in April? Do you think there is a link with the last crisis in Idlib?
You are asking me, right?
Yeah.
I think the reasoning to buy, decision to buy S-400 was quite complex. I don't think that only one reason could explain it. There is this, what I would call factual explanation, which is that Turkey does need this air defense system, and it has been trying to buy this system from different countries, especially the foremost from the United States, but couldn't do it. So in that sense, this was a necessary decision to buy it. But there is also a political explanation, I think. Turkey, at least for me, Turkey had needed to compensate Russia for its cooperation in Syria and also for its cooperation on the energy issues, building the nuclear power plant. And I think this was a very good way of kind of responding the gesture. And the third explanation I can find is a kind of a diplomatic, bureaucratic explanation that sometimes we hear that the United States did not convey its objections early on the process, or they were not really able to do it, how much they objected to the process. So it gave kind of an impression to the decision makers in Turkey that it might be okay to go ahead with it. I don't know how much this played a role. And the final explanation, I would say, is a kind of a psychological explanation. It has to do with what happened on the night of coup attempt. The F-16 airplanes, which are Turkish airplanes, but also NATO connected airplanes, bombing different sites in Turkey, and the government was not able to bring them down. So shooting them in the next time they are going to try such an attempt might be a way of going forward. S-400s could be used for that. But of course, nobody will talk about this. Why Turkey did not yet, delay the activation? Again, the factual reason is coronavirus. I mean, it's created havoc everywhere, and it's also in Turkey and in Russia. I don't think it's because simply that they are not ready to be activated at the moment. That's the factual explanation. But of course, there is always a background of this kind of explanations. Economically, activating them now, of course, would mean the activation of United States sanctions on Turkey, which would be devastating at the moment when Turkey's economy is going in a very difficult patch. And of course, diplomatically, there is a message here, and everybody is trying to read that message, that we are delaying this. So why don't you, United States, become more friendly to us? So we might do something else. So this is kind of a diplomatic message. And I think these are kind of three reasons that I can find out.
Thank you, Professor Aydın. General Hodges, what are the implications of Turkey's activation of S-400? Is there still a way out of this, do you think?
Well, for sure, I hope that there's a way out. I mean, I don't excuse this bad decision by Turkey to purchase S-400. There's nothing good that's going to come out of it. Professor Aydın laid out a good plausible explanations for why the decision was taken. But that doesn't mean that it's a good decision. And for sure, there's no way that if Turkey moves ahead, that they will be able to be part of the F-35 community. And this is not just about having an airplane. Turkey had a critical role in the production, in the supply chain. So this is going to have this will have a negative impact on Turkish economy. But the trust between Turkey and the United States has been so damaged for a variety of reasons by actions on both sides. And this has got to be repaired. I hope that the United States will find a way that for President Erdogan to be able to walk back from this decision in a way that is done by friends, longtime friends, Turkey and the United States, that allows where the United States doesn't have to look like it won, but instead we get back to a good, strong relationship between two allies and two old friends. But Turkey has to want this as well. I can't think of a good reason why Turkey would do this. There is this fairy tale out there that Turkey wanted to buy Patriot, but the United States would not sell it, and that's just not true. I was in Izmir from 2012 to 2014 as the commander of NATO's Land Command. The United States desperately wanted to sell Patriot to Turkey, but we were not willing to give all the technological information, the technical data that Turkey wanted so that Turkey could make it itself. We don't share that same data with Germany or Netherlands or Spain or other nations that have Patriot system either. This is a normal process. So to say that the United States would not sell Patriot to Turkey is not true. And unfortunately, even my own president echoed this inaccurate statement. At the same time, we had American, German, and Dutch Patriot units in Turkey protecting Turkish population, citizens, from Russian-made missiles coming out of Syria. So the irony of this relationship and this situation is something that needs to be clarified and addressed as well. Bottom line, I hope that we find a way out of it. This relationship is too important.
Thank you, General Hodges. Alina, would you like to add something on that, or something on other issues? Or if you don't have anything to add, I will move to the Q&A and get the questions from audience. So now I would like to turn to my colleague Ceylan Canbilek in Ankara, who kindly offered to help us for this part of agenda. So Ceylan, over to you.
Thank you, Kadri. Happy to help with the questions. And the first two are familiar, similar to each other, so I will just combine them. The first one is from Haldun Solmaz-Türk. Bearing in mind the institutionalization of Turkish national security decision-making and the ultimate decision unit being single dominant individual, how far is it to talk about Turkish policy rather than President Erdogan's policy, particularly in the context of Russia? And another one on foreign policy and leadership. This is from Herbert Regenbogen. Is the President of Turkey, Erdogan, a spoiler in which Turkish foreign policy is gouged to portray themselves as a victim? I believe these can be directed to Professor Aydın.
Thank you, Ceylan.
Okay, difficult questions. Well, the second question is easier, of course. Yes, especially President Erdogan likes to present himself and his country always as a victim. That's his political tactic in domestic politics, and I think it has become in recent years a political tactic in international relations as well. For the first question is also, a person who is ruling a country in last 17 years, making a decision in whatever way he makes a decision, doesn't make a difference. It's a policy of Turkey, for the analytical purposes. When we are talking and when we are writing, we might say it's the decision of the government of Turkey, but in practice, it doesn't make any difference. Especially in international relations, people don't see the difference. They react what Turkey does. However, Turkey reached that decision, it doesn't matter for the other countries. So by that token, we can say that all the decision making in Russia is concentrated on Putin. So it's the Putin's foreign policy, but it doesn't make any difference. It's Russia eventually that puts all its effort behind Putin's decision making, and it's the same in Turkey also.
General Hodges, would you like to answer, I believe?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment on Professor Aydın's excellent analysis. I was told on a recent visit to Ankara, a former Turkish officer told me, he said, General, just keep in mind the decision to purchase the S-400 was not an institutional decision. And of course, what he was talking about goes to the heart of this, that the Turkish acquisition process goes directly up to the head of state, not through the Ministry of Defense, which is the more common procedure. And so I think it does matter that we make that distinction, because Turkey USA or Turkey NATO 2.0 has got to look, we have to think strategically into the future. If the West, if the United States makes decisions because we're unhappy with something that perhaps President Erdogan did, or the president of any country, based solely on that, then it causes us to think short term and not strategically. And so thinking strategically, we clearly want to have a relationship with our Turkish allies that's important and sustainable way into the future. And so being able to separate these certain decisions, I think does matter.
Go ahead, Alina.
Now, I just want to add something because this is a question which could be very well asked for other countries as well, not only for Turkey and not only for Russia. And I think the real question, and probably that's what is behind the question, is once the current leader, once the current president ends his tenure, his mandate, gets out of power one way or another, how easily, how quickly will the other institutions, will the system shift the strategy, shift the policy? So if President Erdogan, President Putin, or President Trump, for that matter, take a decision which is based solely on their own personal thinking, it's a bad decision, it's a bad strategy. How quickly, once they're not in power anymore, will the entire system of the respective country and the institutions will be able to change, to reverse even the respective strategy and the respective decisions? I think this is the question that we all have to ask at the end.
Okay. Ceylan, you can go ahead.
So the next question is from Daphne McCurdy. Does Turkey have any leverage over Russia, or is it the relationship one-sided? And specifically on Syria, what value does Turkey provide to Russia?
Well, it's not specified. Who would like to answer this question?
Open to all panelists.
I mean, please.
I can start if
Go ahead.
throw the towel. Well, what value Turkey provides to Russia? The simplest answer is that ability to divide NATO. That's the best value that Turkey could give to Russia. Russia is able to meddle, instill a difference within NATO ranks. That's I think the most important benefit of this this relationship. But apart from that, let's not think Russia as an all-powerful country. Right? In Syria, they are in a very big trouble. Right? They have spent so much money that they cannot afford, really. And Putin is, and Russia is very, I think, they wish to finish up Syria as soon as possible. And also Turkey provides there to kind of a counterbalance to the United States in different theaters of Syria. So in a sense, there is a value. But whether Turkey has a leverage, that's something else. Overall, I don't think Turkey has much leverage towards Russia. We have seen this in 2015 when Turkey decided to put down a Russian airplane. And within overnight, the Russian reaction was to block everything. Right? There was no leverage there. Everything was blocked totally, and the policy was totally reversed. So that shows the different type of Russian decision-making when it matters to them to show a reaction. They can just disregard every kind of a connection. But recently in Idlib, that was a different story. When Turkey kind of differentiated between Russia and its allies in Syria, Syrian regime, Russia showed very clearly that they don't care about their allies. If you don't attack Russia directly, then you have some sort of a leverage. I'll stop here.
Good. Go ahead, General. You should help me up, please.
I was just going to say, in terms of what value is Turkey to Russia, Professor Aydın, of course, hit on a critical part of it. I would say Turkish inaction or lack of firm response in the Black Sea helps the Kremlin with its desire to make the Black Sea a Russian lake. Turkey is a respected economic, military, diplomatic country. It's a large country. It could be doing so much more in the Black Sea region to help push back on Russia's desire to dominate the entire region. Georgia, Turkey's neighbor, has long wanted to establish a seaport in Anaklia, so that a deep water port that would enable traffic from Eurasia to move to Europe. Georgia could become the logistics hub between Eurasia and Europe. It would completely change the economic dynamics of the Black Sea region. Turkey would benefit, Romania would benefit, Ukraine would benefit. Only Russia would not benefit. European countries like Germany, the Netherlands, they would invest in Georgia, this logistics hub, and then they would take an interest in the security of Georgia. And of course, they'd be very interested in freedom of navigation and legal exclusive economic zones and territorial waters, which is exactly why Russia has pushed back and did everything it could to make sure that this port never got underway in Georgia. Turkey has done nothing, has said very little about this. They could be much more helpful in the diplomatic space and in the information space. Now, I am pleased that Turkey and Ukraine seem to be working more closely together in terms of sharing technology, exercising together, training together. I think this is an important development that needs to continue.
I think we can go to the next question.
So the next one is from Alex Lowe, and it's specifically on Bulgaria, and it's open to all panelists. Any signs of geopolitical Turkey-Russia competition in Bulgaria today?
Go ahead, General. Go on to answer.
I don't see, I'm sorry, I don't have a specific thing there. Of course, Russia's attempts or influence inside Bulgaria is still strong, but also Turkish influence inside Bulgaria is still strong, particularly on the eastern corner of Bulgaria there. So it would not surprise me that the various influences would bang into each other, but I don't have a specific example that I could answer with.
Thank you. Alina?
Yes, indeed, the Russian influence is very, very strong in Bulgaria, and Turkey has its own interests, especially when it comes to the Turkish minority. But when you look at a country like Bulgaria, and there are other countries in the region with this specific, which is a corrupt country with a very, very corrupt government, there are many geopolitical actors at play, but the most important one becomes the corruption itself and the corrupt government. So while Russia does continue to have a strong influence, much stronger than Turkey, if you ask me, I think that the main geopolitical interest and actor there, it's the corruption and the bad governance. And as I said, it's not only Bulgaria, it's other countries in the region where the same sort of analysis can apply. We look at them at geopolitical, as fields of geopolitical competition between one country or another, when in fact the real interest which is there and the real actor out there are their own bad governments.
Okay. Professor Aydın, would you like to add something on that, or?
Well, I mean, there is I would say, trilateral moves in the Balkans as a whole. European Union, Turkey, and Russia, they always moving among the same circles and trying to increase their influence. But I wouldn't really characterize that as a competition. You know, when I hear competition, I imagine what Turkey and Russia had in the Black Sea, in the Caucasus, and in Central Asia during the 1990s. You know, it was very intense and very clear competition with different aspects, you know, economic, politics, security, social, and everything. In the Balkans, we don't see that kind of an intensity of competition. I don't think Turkey is a big, in that sense, that big player in Bulgaria, especially when you contrast it with Russian position in Bulgaria.
So the next one is exactly on Central Asia and geopolitical considerations. It's from Lars Alexander Muchov. Which role plays Central Asia in the competing geopolitical considerations of Turkey and Russia? And how is this struggle likely going to play out vis-a-vis the ever-growing influence of China in that region? No specific panels.
I'd like to answer this question. Go ahead, General.
Let me address just one aspect of it, and it is this East-West economic corridor that I alluded to a little bit earlier, that the last thing that the Kremlin wants is for Georgia to become a logistics hub between Central Asia and Europe. Already in the month of April, the number of trains from China that ended up in Duisport in Germany, which is the terminus of the Silk Road, if you will, the new Silk Road, is at a record level. So after February and March being low due to the virus, April is already back up at normal levels and beyond. So this east-west traffic is important. If the port of Anaklia comes into being, then you could shave off even more days of the amount of time it takes to move containers from Shanghai all the way to Duisburg. It would significantly change the economic dimensions of the Black Sea region. Everybody there benefits except for the Kremlin, of course. They don't want the competition, and they don't want European countries being interested in security and stability in Georgia, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, or Turkey. So this is where part of the competition comes from. And as always, if the West does not step forward, the Chinese will always step in and fill that vacuum. They're already taken over so much of the transportation infrastructure in Central and Eastern Europe. And if the West does not compete here, eventually the Chinese are going to do it, and then we're going to be regretting it.
Alina?
I don't see it as a competition either, because the interests are different. Russia needs Central Asia to remain in its political sphere of influence. It has traditionally been there, and it's very important for the Russian domestic audience, for the Russian population, to continue to perceive this as such. Russia also, Kremlin, also needs Central Asia for its Eurasian Union, which is another construct for domestic consumption, which Putin uses from time to time whenever he needs to show that he is very strong and very mighty. So I don't think Russia has a very strong economic interest in Central Asia, but rather a political interest, while China has a very strong economic interest. So I don't see the competition because the interests are different. But I do agree with General Hodges that the European Union and the West in general should be much more worried about what China is doing in Central Asia and throughout Europe, for that matter.
Mustafa Bey, are you adding something, or shall I go on with the next?
Yeah,
question?
just go on. Yeah.
Okay, and this one is for you. And you already touched upon the naval presence in Black Sea, but this is specific to NATO. Do you think it's from Haldun Solmaz Türk? Do you think the Turkish military is too willing to increase NATO naval presence in Black Sea?
Well, when you put the question as too willing, the answer is easy. It's not too willing to have more NATO presence in the Black Sea. It never had. Turkey's position in the Black Sea, I think, has always been to preserving the equilibrium it was created at the end of the Cold War, where Turkey was slightly a better or higher power in the Black Sea as far as naval forces are concerned, and supported by NATO from outside. And the Turkish preference was not to corner Russia too much by the too many NATO or Western presence in the Black Sea and the Caucasus. And when you talk to the Turkish officials, they would indicate to Georgia 2008 and Ukraine 2014 as kind of Russian reactions for too much Western presence in the region. Whether this is a right reading of the situation, it doesn't matter, but that's the kind of a perception from Turkish higher-ups in decision-making. So I don't think that Turkey would like to have more NATO powers in the Black Sea. But occasionally, one hears when Turkey and Russian interest clashes in Syria, then you see Turkish president going to Ukraine and starting to talking about why NATO is not being more in the Black Sea. I think these are just a kind of a play for the games, play for the time, but not real Turkish position.
If no other comments on this one, I'm moving to the next one. And this is for Alina and Mustafa Bey, and it's from Stephen Flanagan. How have Turkey and Russia managed to keep differing political and military policies in the Black Sea region from damaging their cooperation in Syria and on energy and economic issues? For example, Russia didn't seem to react harshly to President Erdogan's February meeting with President Zelensky, where he criticized Russian operations in Idlib and announced a 33 million assistance package to Kiev for the transfer of Turkish military equipment to the Ukrainian army. At the same time, Turkey has continued to support Ukrainian and Georgian aspirations to join NATO.
Alina.
I think that the first key to a good cooperation, which is, well, it's too much said good cooperation, but not going at each other's throat in the Black Sea between Turkey and Russia, is because, as I said before, Turkey has very much retreated politically from the Black Sea region. It is not the same important actor, major actor that it used to be, that it wanted to be. It's very much consumed that it should be with its southern border. So it doesn't project the image of a real competitor, of a real opponent, even to Russia's interests in the region. I think that is why President Putin doesn't pay too much attention to the dance that Turkey is now doing with Ukraine. He probably will if it gets more serious. But on the other hand, he pretty much got what he wanted with Crimea. So he feels like his position when it comes to, maybe he will get even more in eastern Ukraine. So he feels like his position there is not threatened by what Turkey and by the dialogue between Turkey and Ukraine.
Yeah, I agree with Alina, and unfortunately, Turkey's focus has really moved on from Black Sea to the detriment of all other regions, also focusing too much on the Middle East. And in the Middle East is too much focusing on Syria and kind of ignoring the other regions. And Turkey is certainly not as active as it was in the Black Sea 10 years ago or even before. And also, the February was interesting. I think that was the aftermath of attacks on Turkish soldiers in Syria. And Putin and Russia understands that Turkey sometimes needs to show its reaction. And they allowed Turkey to show its frustration in Syria. And Turkey did a number of this kind of pushbacks in different theaters, not only in Ukraine, but also in Georgia, in Syria, and in Libya, everywhere, and become very critical of Russia overnight. But that continued only a couple of days, and after which there was also, at the same time, actually, signals to Russia, let's start talking, not putting blame directly on Russia. That was a kind of a game that Russia did understand that Turkey needed to do it. And regarding supporting Georgia and Ukraine for NATO membership, that was the Turkish position all along. From the very beginning, this is not new and there is nothing new. So Russia does know that, and it doesn't do not ask from Turkey to change it at all, because presumably Russia also realized that it's not the Turkish decision that makes the influence to make these two countries member of NATO. So it hardly worth it to pressure Turkey to change its position on these two countries. And finally, this Turkey and Russia, the magical word is kind of is the compartmentalization. They seem to be able to compartmentalize their relationship until a position where everything collapses suddenly. Until that moment, it seems that they can divide the relationship in different theaters and trying to not affect the relationship, what's happening in one theater in another theater, or in one area in another area.
You. And the next one is again from Haldun Solmastürk, and it's a follow-up question on S-400s. Isn't the S-400 decision a sign of fundamental problem of communication between Turkey and NATO/USA? And I believe either General Hodges and Mustafa Bey can pick this up.
General?
Thank you, Professor. I wish I had the view that you have behind you, by the way. Absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
As we said earlier, of course, this was a problem of communication between Turkey and the United States to some extent, but it's more a reflection of the fact that we don't have a strategy that looks in a clear, sustainable, long-term way about the important role that Turkey has in the greater Black Sea region, both as part of NATO, but also as an ally to the United States. And so we end up kind of bouncing from issue to issue to issue because it's not grounded into an overall strategic framework. The fact that the boundary between U.S. European Command and U.S. Central Command is also the border between Turkey and Syria is, to me, the manifestation of the framework needing to be a significant upgrade so that we make smart decisions and look at Turkey and the critical role it plays in the region to help contain Iran, deter Russia, help provide stability in the Balkans. And if you change the map or how you look at the map, it changes how you think about things. And so this S-400 decision, the mistake that the United States made in partnering with YPG to fight against ISIS, that was tactical benefit, strategic mistake, and we're going to be paying the price for that for a long time. As the professor said, Turkey has a very long memory, as does Russia, and I think we made a mistake there by doing that. So, reestablishing trust. After the attempted coup, the United States should have been the first country on the planet to immediately say that this was wrong, that any attempt to overthrow a democratically elected government is unacceptable, especially when it's an ally. So several things that the United States has done wrong. At the same time, a relationship takes two, and Turkey has to want to save this relationship. Turkey has to value the relationship, and always being the victim, always blaming the United States or the West or Europe for its problems is not helpful either.
Mustafa Bey?
I think General Hodges made very good points, and I just agree with them. And just add, we hear this argument sometimes from the Turkish decision makers or people close to the decision makers that they didn't get the US reaction early on, or they didn't get it enough. And also sometimes I hear the same argument from some of the American analysts. They are making the same case that the US had to make its case more well known to Turkey and early on. But personally, I don't think so. I mean, I got the message from the first minute that S-400, much before the decision, when people started talking about S-400, I learned about the American opposition to it and the reasons, and they were very clear. So as an academic, if I know it, I'm sure some of the decision makers at least knew it, and a diplomat certainly knew it. So I wouldn't personally agree that there was, the message was not really given enough, but we occasionally hear this argument, especially from Turkey's side, but sometimes from the American side too.
Thank you. The next one is from Galip Dalay. Given the recent developments in Libya, in which Turkey-backed GNA is gaining ground vis-a-vis Haftar forces, which is Russia-backed, what scenarios do you anticipate to play out between Russia and Turkey in Libya? New cooperative framework or more conflictual phase? And he ends with a personal note that he doesn't make any discrimination against any speaker, so it's open for all.
Who would like to start to answer this question?
Well, let me take a stab at a piece of it. I just looked at a picture recently of destruction of one of General Haftar's aircraft sitting on the ground on fire after it was struck by a Turkish unmanned aerial system. I think where we're headed is I think the European Union is going to make a decision to put boots on the ground in Libya. They are looking at potentially hundreds of thousands of refugees coming across the Mediterranean into Europe. And of course, Italy will be the first place that they come to. I think that the European Union is looking for, looking at its options to help bring an end to the conflict there in Libya. I don't know this for a fact, obviously, and they would have to have some sort of a mandate, but Italy specifically has been anticipating for the last 3 or 4 years the potential for having to put troops there as part of some kind of peacekeeping force or peace implementation force or something, because they can't take more refugees into Italy. So I think we're heading to something like that here within the next year.
Professor Aydın?
Well, I'm not an expert on Libya, but if you are looking Turkish-Russian relationship there, I think we will see both cooperative framework and also conflicting relationship, just like in Syria. You know, we both cooperate and conflict in Syria, and it will be continuing the same thing in Libya. The difference between Syria and Libya is that for Russia, Libya is not Syria. You know, there are Russian boots on the ground in Syria. They have invested a lot. So far in Libya, it's Wagner Group. It's very circumstantial. It's not directly the Russian presence there. So the Russian position might really determine the relationship between Turkey and Russia over Libya, because Turkish position is much openly declared in Libya, and we are there already. So Turkey cannot really change its position, but Russia still able to change it. So it might depend on Russia. And also Turkey has shown its willingness and actually its wish to have a cooperative framework with Russia when we had this meeting in Moscow, trying to broker a ceasefire between all the countries, and also trying to bring everything, also Russia to the Berlin framework. So Turkey prefers obviously to create some sort of a rapproche understanding, at least with Russia, similar to Syria in Libya. It hasn't happened so far, but as I said, Libya is not that important to Russia. So Turkey might have more leeway in Libya than Syria, but General is right. The European position might be important there, but I don't know how Europe is going to play in the post-COVID-19 world, whether it will just, deep look inside more and more, or be able to play any role in its environment. We have to wait and see there.
So I'm moving to the next one. This one is from Lincoln McCurdy, and it's open for all. What's the current status in Russian-YPG relations?
No one knows it.
I think, as always, it's. Russia never recognized PKK as terrorist organization, and they never recognized YPG as a terrorist organization. They had connections, both PKK and YPG, throughout the crisis, but they avoided to sending military support to them or military gear to them like the United States is doing. So that's the difference from Turkish perspective, I think. And Russia is there to pick up the pieces if there is a kind of a break between US and YPG. If that happens, I'm quite sure Russia would be more friendly with the YPG. But we keep hearing that, of course, they keep the connection. Whenever possibility, they push YPG towards Syrian regime to cooperate with the Syrian regime or agree with the Syrian regime. They always try to broker a kind of a peace between them, but that seems to be the extent of the connection so far.
Thank you. So we have one question and a comment. The comment is from Aydın Sezer, and he thanks General Hodges for his clarification on Patriot's sale to Turkey. And the last question is from Galip Dalay to General Hodges. Apart from Turkey, Russia is gaining ground in the Middle East's arms market. In 2017, more than 50% of Russia's arms export went to Middle East, including to many US allies in the Gulf and beyond. To what extent do you think that the US will push back or sanction its allies' military purchase from Russia?
If you guys will allow me, I need to address one thing about Montreux that I meant to do it earlier and I failed. I absolutely do not believe that we should be trying to get around Montreux. Montreux actually benefits NATO. And Montreux is not a problem for the West. We don't come even close to halfway filling the potential number of days that we could have US or German or Royal Navy ships in the Black Sea region. So the Montreux Convention actually is a good structure, and Turkey generally does a good job enforcing it, although I think Turkey could be more transparent, but generally there is no desire to try and get around it from a competition standpoint. To this specific question, there's three parts to it. Great power competition, the law, and US domestic politics. In great power competition, if some of our allies or friends in the Middle East are looking at purchasing Russian equipment, of course, it's the prerogative of every nation to purchase what they want, but there's going to be consequences for it. I would rather see the United States and Western countries and Turkey compete and offer something better. And Turkey has a wonderful defense industry, offer something better so that those countries don't turn to Russia as their source. Now, the law, and this is the real point of the question, the US law would require sanctions in certain cases, and the president, and the president will be bound to enforce the law, but depending on pressure from the Congress to hold him accountable for enforcing the law. And then, of course, the fact that we are in a US presidential election year is going to affect a lot of things. The administration will not want to be seen as being soft on Russia or easy on Russia because they're open to attack from their political opponents. So I think all of these will impact what happens next.
Thank you, General. Alina and Professor Aydın, if you don't have anything to add, we are arriving to the end of our meeting. Ceylan, thank you so much. And well, let me thank all three of you for joining us and making this conversation work. It has been really terrific. Thank you, General. Thank you, Alina. Thank you, Professor Aydın. And let me thank my colleague in Ankara, Özgür Unluhisarcıklı, and Ceylan Canbilek. Thanks to my colleague Alberto Taglia Pietra in Brussels, who helped to put all of this together. And above all, thanks all of you who have joined us today. And thank you, and hope to see you soon again. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye.